I have finally finished The Abominable by Dan Simmons. So I'm going to talk about this book a little bit because I have some very strong feelings about some of the stuff that was done in this book and what was going on. Dan Simmons is probably known the most for The Terror, which was turned into a TV show, and from what I understand has very exemplary reviews and probably earned those. He also wrote this book about mountain climbing in Everest in 1930, I guess, was kind of the time period that was being pushed through this. It's about three guys, a British deacon and an American who is narrating named Jake, and then a French mountain climber named Jean-Claude. And they have been given a bunch of money, basically, to go find a cousin of this other person in India that had been climbing up Everest, and he had disappeared. And they had heard some weird things from some German climbers who had seen him. And this was also at the same time Mallory had tried to climb up Everest and had not succeeded, had died climbing up Everest. And this book is just so frustrating. This is one of the most frustrating things I have ever. And it's not because it's poorly written. It is very well written. That is the problem. Because let me get into what's going on. With a book title called The Abominable, and you do know that Dan Simmons has a tendency to write stuff that is supernatural, there are some implications that you think this is going to be about Yeti or Abominable Snowman or something in that. Even the back blurb kind of alludes to that in some way because they're being stalked by some unseen force, blah, blah, blah. The actual Yeti part is mentioned maybe a couple characters maybe throw that out now and then about, oh yeah, there's supposed to be Yeti up here and da-da-da-da-da. And it's just not even mentioned much. And then the actual twist of what has happened is the most ridiculous thing I have ever in my life. And let me get into that because you spend 450 pages. Here's what happens. Here's the problem. Here's what Dan Simmons did. The problem is you spend 450 pages with this book being a historical fiction, basically, a literary quality historical fiction. Minute detail about how to climb, minute detail about all the stuff they use on climbing expeditions, a lot of diatribe about apparently Dan Simmons doesn't like Mallory. There's a lot of Mallory hate in this, which feels kind of weird because he's not even like a character. Like, it's just sort of kind of casually to the side about how he and one of the main characters had sort of this major feud and Mallory didn't know what he was doing and da-da-da. It was the 1920s, y'all. Like, no one knew what they were doing when they were climbing mountains. But you spend 450 pages with this really minute, heavily explained how we're going to climb this mountain and practice for climbing this mountain and all this sort of stuff about how we're going to find this guy who'd gone missing. They get to India. They meet the person they're supposed to be hooking up with, which is a she. That's another surprise that they have been like, Cousin Reggie, and they keep assuming that it's a woman. Well, it's not a surprise because the blurb on the back tells you she is. So you get like 400 pages of this surprise. Oh, surprise, here, oh, it's a woman. Well, the back of the book has told you that already. Reggie is a she. And she hooks up with this group, and she's going to be part, because shockingly, she's an expert mountain climber, too. Who knew? And she joins up with them as well to go find her cousin and all that, to find her cousin's body or whatever and all this. And the characters are, outside of Jake, maybe, he tries to build Deacon as this interesting character, who's not really. There's more time spent in the detail of the climbing and all that, so the history of mountain climbing, than there is really developing these characters much. Reggie in particular, because she doesn't show up until like the 400 mark, is completely, she's just there. I don't even know why she's there other than to throw in a woman and have a love interest at the end, which just is completely ridiculous. And then your twist happens 450 pages in, and it goes from this literary mountain climbing book to a like Scooby-Doo men's adventure. And I'm going to spoil some stuff right now, so if you want to read the book, 600 and some odd pages, go ahead. But at the 450 mark, they realize that they're being hunted down by Germans. And the Germans have been dressing up like Yeti to confuse the Germans have literally climbed up Everest in costume. I don't understand, and there's not even really a good explanation given except, oh, it'll get back to the other natives that everybody was killed by a Yeti. Yetis with Lugers? The whole concept that these Germans would have done this is just absolutely ridiculous, because it turns out that her cousin, of course, he was like a spy, and he had like secret information about the up-and-coming Hitler. And they're all like trying to get that stuff that he was running from the Germans and this whole thing, and suddenly out of nowhere Deacon is a Buddhist. That just randomly happens at some point. They're like, oh, he was meditating all this time. We thought he was just sitting on the mountain planning the day. Just some of the weirdest. If this book had started out this crazy, I would have been fine. If the book had started out the way it just dives off the deep end, I would have been okay, because that's what you're getting into. But when you have spent 450 pages with a very detailed historical fiction, and then it just decides it's going to take a deep dive into like Crystal Skull territory, I don't know what to do with this book. Like, I really don't know what to do with this book. Because at the 450 mark, it suddenly becomes this, like, shoot-'em-up chase. And on Everest, once again, which is at this point in time, nobody had ever gotten to the summit to. So we're being led to believe this is all happening at, like, not base camp. It's happening at, like, camp 6 or 7. Up this mountain. And it's just so weird what it turns into. It would have also been okay if the whole supernatural element had stayed the whole way through. But there was no supernatural element until suddenly you get to 450, which is, suddenly it turns into Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. It turns into craziness. And I literally, like I said, don't know what to do with this book, because I wouldn't even know what to classify it as. I think it's tried to classify itself as like a thriller of some sort and horror, but it's not really horror. It turns into adventure. There was no horror. The terror would have been horror because it was a supernatural element through the whole thing. This is not. This is never a supernatural element for 450, and then turns into a historical adventure of some sort. It's strange. It really just is strange. It's like, I'm not sure what Simmons was trying to do here. And again, not badly written. It was not badly written. There are some parts that I had a little bit of issue with. He's very dismissive of the Tibetan, I guess, guides that were in this. And, like, at one point he has Jake say something about, I didn't even know their names, da-da-da. Well, they're just cannon fodder. And at one point they are very, very, he uses a sky funeral as, like, a horror element in it, and that to me was kind of offensive. But there are some elements of that, and the argument would be, well, it was the 1930s, these guys are going to have these attitudes towards the native porters and stuff like that, but still, it's still kind of unsavory, some of the stuff that's added in it. It's just like, did you have to add that part? Is that necessary? But this book is legitimately just frustrating, because it just goes bananas. in like the last 150 pages after you've spent 450 pages with this thing as being about mountain climbing. And I don't know what to tell you about it. I don't know who this book is for. If you're a horror person, this isn't going to do it. This isn't horror. If you are a thriller person, like adventure thriller, you've got to get 450 pages before anything happens. And if you are somebody who is just in it for like historical fiction about climbing Everest and what was going on, it goes bananas in the last fourth. So I'm not exactly sure who the audience for this is. This book is insane. I have not read a book like that is this insane for a long time. I've read bad. I have read boring. This is, I don't know what this is. And it's just, I don't know. It's so sad because you spend so much time. There was so much time spent with me reading this because it is such a big book that when you get to the part where it's just like going in crazy, it's like you get whiplash almost, because it's like we've gone from climbing up the mountain and I can't breathe and I need my oxygen and da-da-da to there's Germans and Lugers and they've carried a machine gun up Everest, because why not? Why not at this stage? So, you know, if you want something that I'm not sure who the audience is for, this is for, go ahead, have The Abominable. But otherwise, I don't know what to do with this book. To the point that I'm starting to question Dan Simmons and what he was doing with this book as well.